But we're talking about stars a little bit. I hope you can see this. This is a picture of a spiral galaxy. Light years are a measure of distance, not time. It's the distance that light travels at its present rate in a year. This galaxy is about 2 million light years away, apparently. Here's another one. You see these pictures in magazines and all the time. Here's a galaxy, spiral nebula, that's 18 million light years away. So it's about 9 times as far as the previous one I showed you. Here's one, in fact 2, but they're about, the big one, the main one here is 25 million light years away. These are big distances, especially at the speed of light. Set that aside. Here's one that's 32 million light years away. Here's one that's 65 million light years away. These are all spiral galaxies. There are lots of other nebula, but these are spiral nebula. And here's one that's 106 million light years away. Now, I don't know if you've noticed as I was flashing through these things, but here they all are at one time. And do you notice anything strange about these galaxies? One's only 2 million light years away, 118, 125, 130. I deliberately put them in distance order, okay? Do you notice that their arms are spread out almost the same? Well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, here's the point. The furthest galaxies had to release their light long before the closer galaxies, obviously, okay? Because light's not infinite, it's finite, it has a finite speed, whatever it is. The further galaxies did not have as much time to rotate and twist their arms. We should be seeing the further galaxies earlier in their cycle, right? Thus, the closer galaxies should have the most twist, but they don't. The furthest galaxies have just as much twist as the nearer one, which says they're all done at the same time. The speed of light, even if the speed of light was 1,000,000 times faster in the past, that would account for them being so similar. This is another one of the reasons that the speed of light issue starts to tie things together that would otherwise be very mysterious. Some other insights. It's interesting that from Job, we talked about Job last time, Job 38. Where is the way that light dwelleth? Light's dynamic, darkness is static. These are a remnant of some of the things we point out from Job. We went through Job 38 last time. And this, canst thou bind the influences of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? These two constellations are the only two in the heavens that are gravitationally linked. Other constellations look like a grouping, but they're really not, because some are close, some are far. But these Pleiades and Orion are, in fact, have a gravitational relationship. And so I don't know how Job knew that, because most astronomers today don't realize that.
I wonder, why are we finding this stuff out now? So let me explain that a little bit. There's several reasons that I want you to know. First, we couldn't really know what the ancient skies looked like before we discovered the math behind the movements of the solar system. That happened in the 1600s. Anybody know who discovered how the solar system works? You hear Copernicus. Copernicus figured out that the sun was the center instead of the earth. The guy who figured out the actual math that drives the planets, that was Kepler, Johannes Kepler. And Kepler puzzled out the 3 laws of planetary motion in the early 1600s. Now those laws hold today. They're math, and they're the same laws that NASA uses and the ESA uses to predict where planets will be. When they launch a rocket and it has to travel for 13 years to get someplace, they know where the celestial bodies will be, because it's all like a great clock. It's extremely regular. It's mathematically precise.
One of the reasons why we're hearing about the star now is because we've taken that math and put it into software.
You can see the night sky from any place on the surface of the Earth at any time in history in an instant. And it's so fast you can animate the sky.
Let's look now at Psalms 19. This one I always glossed over when I was younger. I just thought it was a nice nature poem. I never saw what I see today now that I know more about the stars. So it says in verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God. Now, the glory of God is something we're going to discuss especially when we talk about the constellation Libra, the scales and the judgment, and the cross and the crown that are surrounding that one and its deacons. But the glory of God is something that he cannot give to himself. It's sort of like, I cannot make you love me. So, of course, we can look up in awe at the magnitude and the hugeness of the universe when we look at the stars. But this, I believe, is talking about something much deeper than that, much more profound than just a sense of general awe. It's also something far more specific. So it says, the firmament shows his handiwork day unto day. So day after day, it's doing something. It's uttering speech. It's talking to us. Now remember, one of the reasons he created them is to talk to us, to send us messages through them. Night after night, it reveals knowledge. There's no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Now what's interesting here is after the Tower of Babel, when the languages were split, it's saying here, this is post-Babel when it's written, there's no language or speech where their voice is not heard. So the story didn't get lost because the languages changed. Their line has gone out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. So I want to spend some time looking at this word, their line, and also their words. I'm going to use a little thing here called Stellarium. It's a free download. Anybody can download it. And it shows right now and at any time and any place in the past what the stars and the planets and the sun and the moon were doing. So I've got these pictures turned on so you can see them. But I want you to notice this red line. This is the path of the sun through the sky. It's called the ecliptic. And the zodiac is the constellations that fall along this line. So when Psalms says, where did that go again? Right here, their line has gone out through all the earth, and it's uttering speech, and it's revealing knowledge, and it has words in it that go to the end of the world that all languages can understand. That's something very interesting. Now, if you study ancient cultures at all, you'll see that almost all their investments, their heavy investments of time and labor and energy and money, were to build these buildings, these massive buildings that were tracking the stars. And it's in all these ancient cultures, even in the Mayan and some of the South American cultures, all over Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. They're tracking these stars. And the question is why? Like, why are they paying such special attention to this, the astronomy of the day? And what we know from ancient records and from what we know today from astronomy is that the ancient Babylonians were as precise today in their accounting of the stars as we are now with our advanced technologies. And all these ancient cultures had these same signs that we still have today, that they all would look at this weird thing that looks like, to me, let me go back here, that looks like, where is it? Sorry. There it is. Nothing. It looks like nothing. And they would look at that and they would all say in all these different nations, that right there, my young boy and girl, that is a girl. And she is not just a girl, she is a virgin. And she's not just a virgin, she's got wheat in her hand. They all said this about this particular constellation. So I find that very interesting that that carried over. Now, what does that mean? So let's take this a little deeper. I'm going to take you to the next slide. And we'll talk about what this means, that their words went to the ends of the earth. What in the world is that? What are those words? So in Psalm 147 and Isaiah 40, it says that God calls the stars by name. He counts the number of the stars. He calls them all by name. And here again, he sits above the circle of the earth, stretches out the heavens like a curtain. Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these things, who brings out their hosts by number. He calls them all by name. Now, in the Bible itself, in the earliest known writings that we have, of course, Genesis talks about the creation, but before Genesis was written, the book of Job, we believe, was the earliest book to be written, as far as its chronology of its ancientness. And Job was a man who was alive during the time of Abraham, we think, who lived in the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization around ancient Babylon and Sumer. He's from the land of Uz, and that's all in that Fertile Crescent area. And toward the end of the book, God and Job are talking back and forth, and God is talking to him about the different constellations that he claims that he named. We've got the Pleiades here. We've got Orion. We've got Arcturus, that's the name of a single star within a constellation. And then God says, can you bring forth the Mazzaroth in its season? And scholars, that word Mazzaroth has been transliterated, meaning it's just shared as syllables, because the interpreters weren't sure what it meant. It's just the Mazzaroth. And scholars believe, based upon its context within the constellations and talking about the ordinance of heaven and how it's brought out in its season, perhaps the Mazzaroth is referring to what we know today to be the line of the sun that passes through 12 constellations that we know of as the zodiac. Let me turn these back on here. There they are. So it starts in ancient Babylonian times. The first star, the first constellation, I should say, of the zodiac was this virgin, Virgo, who had this thing in her hand, this wheat. And then it goes on from there, this direction, to the Libra. This is the scales. Then the scorpion. Then the centaur, we call Sagittarius, meaning the archer. Then it goes on to this goat fish called Capricorn. Aquarius, the water bearer. Then over to Pisces, the fish. Then Aries, the lamb. Then Taurus, the bull. Then Gemini, the twins. Then Cancer, the crab. And then Leo, the lion. And then it starts over again. And every day, of course, the sun goes through all 12 of these because it's going through them. But whenever the sun rises above the horizon, whatever image it's rising in at that time, that's the sign that they say that you're in at the time. So some of the signs last a little longer, like she's longer than, say, even Scorpios or Libra. Okay, so they're not all equidistant. But one of the things that I learned in my research that was very interesting to me was that each of these constellations in the ancient zodiacs also had what they called a decan or a decan, meaning 10 degrees. So for every, there was 360 degrees for the total circle. Every 10 degrees had a decan with it, and or the constellation itself. So with Virgo, for example, is these other constellations that correspond to her, and with Libra is some others that correspond to it. So we'll get into all the details on that in a minute as we go through, but I just want you to note that there's not just 12 when you look at it that way. The line of the sun passes through 12, but there are 48 constellations that we'll be exploring, and they need to be taken together in order for the story to tell itself right. Okay, otherwise you're just like, what, a centaur and a scales and a crab and a woman, what? So the other issue that you have to know, where did I go here? Here we go. when it says he calls them by name, is that not only are the constellations named, like for example this is Aquarius, but the stars, the bright stars that make up the constellations, were also given names. And those names have been preserved from the ancient Babylonian times for us in the Arabic language. The pre-Islamic Arabs were very good at keeping track of these things, and we have them today. So when you read the story, the name of the stars within the names of the constellations, both along the zodiac and the decans that go along with them, then you come to what we know as the story that's in the stars. So let's talk about the context now of that story. We talked about the war in heaven, but then once we get to earth, something very interesting happens. Adam and Eve are there in the Garden of Eden, of course, and the snake, Satan, is limited in his ability to influence them unless they go to him. And that is at the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And of course, God says, don't go over there. I don't want you to be exposed to that. It's not going to be good for you. And Eve decides she wants to check it out anyway one day. And when she does, God comes to her and she says, "What have you done?" And she says, "The serpent deceived me and I ate this fruit that you told me not to eat." And the serpent, of course, is Satan in that form. And God says to the serpent, and this is one thing I want you to note because it's going to show up in the stars. "Because you did this, you are cursed, and I will put enmity," meaning conflict or aggravation, "between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He," her seed, this is a singular person, "will bruise your head," the serpent's head, "but you will bruise his heel." So the seed of the woman, who's going to come through her as one of her children, is going to defeat and conquer and kill the snake. But in the process, he will be wounded. The promise was given to Eve that there would come a seed that would crush the head of the serpent, and that in the process he would suffer, he would be wounded in the heel, but he at last would be victorious. So this is the story that we see in the stars. You'll see here's another rendition of Virgo. She has this seeds in her hand. That star, that's the very bright star here, is Spica. And it was the name and the meaning of that star was the, I'm looking at the name here, it meant the seed. And it is the same word that's used in Genesis when it's talking about the seed of the woman. It's also a very bright star. I'll show you what it looks like in the sky tonight. It's this one here. This is the sun, so that doesn't count because it keeps moving. But this is a very bright star here, and it's known as the bright one, the one that would come, the hero that would come, the seed of the woman that would crush the head of the serpent. And then up here, you'll notice there, it looks like a lock of a woman's hair tied with a ribbon. This, in Greco-Roman times, took on this name by obviously a wonderful man who loved his wife very much. And apparently the story goes she cut her hair, and he said, "Honey, your hair is so beautiful and I love you so much. Those stars up there are your hair." And he renamed this constellation from Coma to Coma Berenice, which was her name, Berenice. But in the original, I want to draw your attention to this. It looked like this. It's a woman seated on a throne with a little baby. Now, astonishingly, in the original Chaldean, which is the ancient early Babylonians, the Egyptians and the Persians and others all taught that this Decan constellation that was right next to Virgo was a pure virgin. They all taught this. It was a pure virgin that was nourishing her infant son. And the baby's name was the desired one, the one that was longed for. They gave him the name Ahisu, Shesnu, Aiza, and then later in Greek, he was interpreted to be the Christ. So this is not just any little baby on a mother's knee. She's a virgin, and this is the anointed, the Christ that was to come to rescue. Now, this is a very interesting and important point to notice this, because you've probably seen pictures in ancient Egypt of Hathor holding Isis, the baby, and then later on in Greco-Roman times there were other virgin mothers holding babies. And then there's a lot of critique I've seen online of people saying, see, Christianity's just copying, they just baptized the idols to make it Mary holding baby Jesus. Well, that part is true. God was not for idols. But I believe all of these traditions came from this original source, that in these stars was promised this Christ child. You'll see even in Isaiah, it says, the Lord himself will give you a sign. This is the same exact Hebrew word that is used in Genesis 1 when it says, I gave you the sun, moon, and stars to be signs, to give you an omen or evidence or a mark or a miracle in the sky. So he gave them a sign of a virgin who would bear a son, and his name would be called Emmanuel. So very interesting analogies here. Additionally, I'm not going to go into it in great detail because it's its own study, amazing jaw-dropping study in other places, but the wise men, they are believed to have been Zoroastrian Persian priests that were of the same kind of priesthood that you would find in ancient Israel, among the Levites. They believed in a single creator God who was the creator of the heaven and earth. They believed that all other gods were false and that they worshipped only the creator. Very interesting, neat group of people, but it's believed that those people were the ones that were watching the skies, that had these same constellations all along, and when they saw these specific, very rare, very unusual pairings of, we call them conjunctions, of things that were happening with the sun, moon, and planets within the constellation Virgo, as well as within the constellation Leo, which is the king constellation. So the king and the virgin combined right next to each other. They saw very unusual things happening in these, and that is what made them at the exact right time board their camels, invest the time, the money, and the energy to cross that desert, thousands of miles. Must have taken them months to do that, and at the exact right moment came to where Jesus was and found him there. So if that's not evidence for the fact that it's not bad to look at the stars, I don't know what it is. That God is indeed sending messages to the people that care to watch through the stars, through the sun and moon and stars. Now, that doesn't mean that he wants us to ignore what he has said and worship the stars and look at the stars rather than to his word for advice and guidance. But certainly it does indicate that he has been, and he will continue, he says, until the day of the Lord, until his coming, to use the heavens to talk to us. So let's go to the next constellation. I should have just shown you that. We'll move right along from Virgo, and we're going to go here to Libra, the scales. Now this I find to be one of the most interesting, compelling things, because again, if you turn off our pictures, can you see anything out of these stars? And yet there they are, and there is where parents and children and parents and children told their children, look, honey, that up there, those stars, that is a balance scale. And there was something that compelled people to keep the traditions going decade after decade after generation after generation. So let's talk about what that might have been. You'll remember we were talking about the war in heaven with Lucifer and his angels, the dragon that won a third of the stars over, a third of the angels, and how that transferred to earth. It spilled over into our planet and with Adam and Eve and their loss of the garden home that they had had until such a time as this conflict could be resolved. Well, a conflict of this nature where God himself and his character is being attacked and he is being set up as someone who lies and who is not fair and who really is serving his own best interest, not his children's best interest. These are charges that have to be answered. You can't just sweep them under the rug, otherwise they just fester, right? And it goes to show, well, maybe Satan was right. So he has to allow, God has to allow for there to be some sort of judgment scales where evidence is put on one side, on God's side, and evidence is put on Satan's side. And then evidence is put on God's side, and evidence is put on Satan's side. And a little here, a little there, a little here, a little there, until it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer who is the real winner, who is the one that is really telling the truth, and who is the one who is a liar. And it's not always easy right from the beginning to see. That's why people are deceived. So in Genesis 3, at that tree, at the knowledge of good and evil, Eve and the serpent are having a conversation. She's saying, no, I can't eat that fruit because God said it's not good for me. He said it's the day I eat it, I will die. And he says, he's lying to you. You're not going to die. You're not going to die. He just knows that you're going to be as smart as he is. And he doesn't want you to be that smart. Well, immediately that places Eve in a position of, is he telling the truth? She'd never really encountered anybody that had lied before. And so she naively believes him and goes ahead and disobeys God and distrusts what God said to protect her. And you have here the evidence having to be shaken out now on the scales. Who's telling the truth and who is not? And so in these stars, remember there's words in the stars. We had the star that was the seed here, the star that is the branch. I forgot to tell you about the branch. Anyway, the stars here in Libra, in these scales, are here on this page. Zubin al-Ganubi. Remember, these are the Arabian translations of the ancient Babylonian names for the constellations. One means that the price is deficient. It's not enough. Zubin al-Shamali, then there's a price which covers that which was deficient. And al-Gubi, just like you would put things on a scale, there's heaped up high. There's evidence on both sides being heaped up high. And then Zubin Akrabi, to me this one is the most important to tell the nature of this scale. It's not just about trading money and merchandising. It says it's the price of the conflict, the price of the war is being put on these scales. So it's talking about this long drawn out hearing where evidence for good or evil is put on until the nature of Satan's rebellion and the nature of sin becomes obvious, because in many ways sin looks very fun and it looks very good and it looks like it's the thing that makes us happy, but in the end it's also the thing that makes us very, very unhappy and very, very sad. So the evidence has to be piled up and piled up. And remember, we talked about the deacons that are on both sides of a constellation. The constellations in the zodiac are along the ecliptic, but then on the sides there are deacon constellations. So this one I find very interesting. Below it is the Southern Cross. The Southern Cross used to be visible up until the time of Christ even in the Northern Hemisphere. Since then, the Earth has wobbled a bit and it's just dipped below the horizon, so we can't see it anymore. But for most of the world's history, and certainly still in the Southern Hemisphere, the Southern Cross is one of the most prominent, brightest, clearest constellations that there are. It's a clear cross in the sky. And then above the Libra is the Northern Crown. So we have the Southern Cross and the Northern Crown, the Corona Borealis. And you'll remember when we were talking in the first video about the heavens declare the glory of God. Now we remember that you can't get glory if you're giving it to yourself. You can't get love if you're demanding it or giving it to yourself. You can only invite it. You can only attract it. And it's the same with God getting glory from his people or from anybody in the universe. You can't have that until it's clarity on these scales that you are actually the right one, that you're the one that's exonerated and you're the one that's truly innocent and that has been innocent all along. And one of the evidences that was piled up high, just like the star says, that things were piled up on these scales, was that God himself, God himself came down from heaven through a virgin as a baby to come and live, to be wounded, deeply wounded, and pay the penalty so that Adam and Eve and all their children could be restored to what they had lost. And in that conflict itself, Satan's character became so clear and Christ's character became so clear that the balances were tipped. And in his favor, it became very clear that Christ, what lengths he was willing to go to love us and to bring us back, and to what lengths Satan was willing to go to keep that from happening. All right, so in the Bible it talks about the day when every knee will bow and the crown will be awarded to the clear winner. It's not just taken by God. It's not just commanded. It is won. And I love that about him. All right, moving on to the next grouping of constellations. And it's very important to remember that these constellations are not islands to themselves. They are surrounded by others that are interacting with each one of them. And this one especially, it bears witness to that. I love this constellation grouping. It says so much about the character of God. So, first off, here we have this scorpion. All right, and all of us know what scorpions are like. I've never been stung by one, but I have family and friends that have. And they can be deadly. They're not necessarily deadly where I live, but in other parts of the world, certainly in the Middle East, they can inflict a wound in the same way that a snake can, that can be deadly. So, the stars, again, are named in this constellation. Al-Akrab means wounding, conflict, or war. So it's very interesting. We're not just talking about a bug here. We're talking about a war that's going on and the nature of the one who started this war. Now, very interestingly, this yellow one here is Antares, and it's the heart and the head of the scorpion, and in that is named wounding, cutting, and tearing. And you'll remember when Jesus was talking about Satan, he said he was a murderer and a liar from the beginning. He was always, there was nothing in his heart that was sympathetic toward things. He wanted to win, and he was willing to do anything to gain that power. Al-Shal-Ahi is the next one, and it means the raised, so it's up in the tail here. It's clear that it's not just a docile little creature, it's ready to sting. And then al-Lasa, that's up here at the stinger, it means the sting of the poisonous one, the poison that can kill you. Okay, and then very interestingly, one of the stars is called Sargas, and in the books that I had, it said it's not definable what that means anymore. We've lost the actual wording, but it's of Sumerian origin. Now, Sumeria is the very first culture in the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia there that we have any records of after the flood and the Tower of Babel era. So it's very interesting. I can't prove this, but Sargas sounds extremely close to Sargon, right? There's some overlying something there. Sargon of Akkad is believed to have been the king, who is the biblical version of Nimrod. And there's a whole other study I could do on Nimrod that is just groundbreaking and amazing. But if you do any study on him at all, you'll find there was 3 different kings that named themselves Sargon. They were not given that name at birth. And the name happened to all of them. They gave them all their own, they all named themselves this after they murdered the former ruling king. They took over his country by killing him. And then they named themselves Sargon. And that name meant, I'm the real king. I'm the legitimate ruler. And I find that very interesting that name, Sargas, is in this little scorpion here, because it is very much the nature of Sargon, of killing someone so that you can rule and you be the legitimate ruler, and doing it by bloodshed and by violence. That is exactly in harmony and exactly aligned with the character of the nature of Lucifer, who wanted the throne of God at any cost. Didn't matter who was in the way. So to me, this sign really shows us in one way. There's multiple ways in which it will be revealed through the zodiac, but one way in which God shows us what the nature of Satan and the enemy of man is actually like. He's not just fighting in self-defense. He's on offense, and he is malicious, and his murders are premeditated. Now, fascinatingly enough and wonderfully enough, over here is one of the deacons, and you'll see him. Let me show him to you here. I don't believe this is the proper rendition of him, but I want to show you something. So here's Scorpio along the line, and right here is Ophiuchus, or I'll get the exact wording in just a second, but he's known as the serpent holder or the serpent bearer, meaning that his strength, he's a strong man, is equal to the serpent's strength. And look at what he's keeping him from doing. He's keeping the snake away from ruling the universe, from getting that crown. Now, interestingly enough, you can't see it in this because they didn't really draw him right, according to the old charts. If you go to the older charts, you'll see it here. Here's the scorpion under his foot, and he's crushing its head with his heel. He's also in line to where the stinger can hit his heel right here. All right. I love that because to me, this is a symbol of Christ, the nature of what Christ came to do. He was keeping Satan from taking rule and plunging the universe into total chaos and sorrow and destruction. And so as he's holding him, he's crushing the scorpion, and he's being attacked in the heel by that scorpion. Now, up here, let me show you with this again. Above Ophiuchus, another deacon, is Hercules. Let me turn him around so you can see him better. Hercules is the strong man. If you go back and look at any of the ancient stories about him, he is the strong man that fights all these different horrible creatures that all in some way or another represent the chaos and the evil and the destruction that has come to man as a result of Satan. Whoops. There we go here. So in this case, he's battling the seven-headed serpent. And in the story, every time he cuts off one of the serpent's heads as he's trying to attack him, it grows another one, so he has to get a brand of fire and kind of lop off a head and sear it so it can't grow anymore. But Hercules is kneeling because his heel has been wounded in the battle. In the end, he wins, but it's quite the conflict and it's quite the war. And in these stars, in these original stories that the pagan stories have really taken off of and copied and twisted a bit, you can still see the story that is being presented about the nature of the character of Christ, the Messiah, and what he was doing for us, for his people, in his ministry and in his life. He came to eradicate Satan's claim on any title through the judgment and through what he did for us on the cross. So this is a very cool story. This is baby Hercules, again a symbol of the Christ, and the stories have been presented just as Herod attempted to kill baby Jesus when he was born. The story of Hercules is that his stepmother, who was jealous of his rulership and wanted to reign in his stead, very similar in nature to Satan, put a snake in his crib to kill him when he was a baby. But he was so strong that he just killed the snake. And in the same way, Satan attempted, through jealousy and through Herod's jealousy, to try to kill Jesus in his infancy, but he could not. So very interesting way that this whole picture together is working to tell us about the ministry of Christ. Now in this next one, the story is wrapped up. So the first is talking about the toiling deliverer, the one that is being beaten and wounded in his saving of us. And now he comes back as the conqueror in this one. As the judgment is finalized, it is over, and he's riding on to conquer Satan and finish him off. So I love this one very much. When I first saw this, let me go show you here. If we follow the line again, you'll see the archer here, the Sagittarius. Sagitta is a word that means arrow. So a Sagittarius is the bearer of that arrow, the archer. And let's go back here. You'll find that he's half man, half horse. And he's fully man, but he's fully horse. He's one and the other. He's not one or the other. And so there's a dual nature going on here, in the same way that there's a dual nature with Christ, the God-man, the one that was born of a virgin. He's not a man. He's a God, but he's also a man. He has been tempted in all ways as we are. And I find it very interesting that he is shooting an arrow at a target, because that says a lot about what his character is. If you know much about Hebrew, you'll know that the Hebrew word for sin it means literally to miss the bullseye, to miss the arrow, the mark, and as a result of that missing, to suffer loss. So here is the man who doesn't miss. He's got a perfect aim, and it represents that he has a perfect character. He has never sinned. He is sinless, and thus he is able to be our sacrifice, our Savior. The other thing I love about this one, I just almost swelled up with tears as I was learning about it, because it was, to me, it's so important for me that God is not just God, but that he's not just real, and he's not just the ruler and the king, but he's also personal. He knows my name. He knows how many hairs are on my head. He knows all the things that I go through. And he's personal, and he cares about me, and he's loving. And that's what this one represents to me. That while he's God, and he has the power and the righteousness to reconcile me to God in a way that no human ever could, at the same time, he understands me at the deepest level. He's touched by my suffering, and by all the suffering that all men and women and children experience in the world. And he is here at last, having won the victory on the cross and suffered through that loss. He's kept the snake from getting to that crown. And now, as this centaur, he's ready to finish the job. So before we saw him as the Alpha, the creator, the one who made the stars, and now we're seeing him as the Omega, the finisher of this great conflict. And what's very interesting is that in Greek, this centaur, this man horse, is called Chiron, and it means the executor, the one that is handing out the judgment. And Jesus talks himself about how the Father has committed the judgment to him, that there's nobody else that can do it. And in Revelation, it talks about how nobody else was worthy to open these scrolls and do this judgment except for the Lamb that was slain. And here we have this person who has done that for us, who's the only one that could have done that for us. And he's no longer here the suffering toiler, but he's the crowned righteous administrator of justice. The judgment has been set. The scales have tipped. We know whose character is who, and this one has been shown in the judgment to have the highest integrity. And he's also got, because he is God, he's got the strongest military force. So in this, he's the finisher. And here's the stars, and their actual words, they're in the star. They're a little bit boring in this one, but they're very important. So there's the knee, there's the heel tendon, there's the arrowhead, there's the bow. But what those things tell us is that archer's bow is aimed straight at the heart of that merciless, on offense, pain-inflicting scorpion, and his job now is to stop him in his tracks and keep him from doing any further harm. And I'm just like, get him! Go get him! It makes me very, very excited. So I just wanted to show you something from Revelation, that when I read this in conjunction with knowing now about the Sagittarius, that didn't make sense to me before, but now that I do, these just came alive. So it says, I saw, this is John the Revelator saying, I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow. There it is. And a crown was given to him. So he's won the crown that he was keeping the devil from getting. And he went forth conquering and to conquer. So he's he's winning. And I think, if I were the devil and these things were so clearly laid out to me and to everybody in the zodiac that I was going to meet my demise, I would do everything in my power to mess that up, wouldn't you? To turn it into idolatry and to keep people from understanding the story that God had put there. Also in Revelation 19, verse 11, this is another reference to this. It says, I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him was called Faithful and True. And in righteousness, not out of selfishness, but in righteousness, he does judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself. I think that means, Jesus was alone in the universe, just unique. Nobody else was God and man in the way that Jesus is. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And he has on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This is the victory cry. This is the finalization of the end of all sin and suffering. I love this one. And then in the deacons, I love this too, is the lyra, the harp, the final triumphant song of joy, the new song that we sing when the whole thing is over. Can't wait to sing that. I'm sorry this is getting a little long, but this is profound. So up in the sky is the pole star. This is how all the stars are going around the center, and the very center is the pole. So very interestingly enough, before the time of Christ, at the beginning of creation, we can backtrack and we can find out how the stars have moved and how the wobbling of the earth has moved things. So at the very beginning of time, when Adam and Eve fell, this dragon, the Draco, was at the pole. It was the center of our stars constellation. And now, since Christ has won, it is off the center and it is over on the side. I love that. So, in Revelation 12, it says, and I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the power and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And the constellation stars that are in this serpent dragon, the first one is Althubin. It means the serpent or the dragon, and that's the one that was the pole star in the ancient Egyptian zodiacs around 2700 BC, which is right about the time, right after the flood, right about the time of the Tower of Babel, right around the same period. So it's perfect timing. Then up here in the head, there's a star that's called the head of the serpent. But check this one out. Al-Wa'id is one of these stars. It means who is to be destroyed. If it was just a picture of a dragon, why would that be one of the names of the stars? He is to be destroyed. And then El-Tanin means the great serpent. So it's very clear when Revelation is talking about this, the dragon, it's all talking about the story that's in the stars. Now, interesting also, this is one of the other deacons. This is an altar called Ara, and it's connected with the Hebrew word Aram, and that means curse or utter destruction. And another star in this one is Al-Magamra, which means the completing, the finishing, the making an end of. So this is not a sacrificial altar. This is the lake of fire in which the dragon is going to be thrown into at the end when Jesus comes as this archer who comes to make war and finish what he began. I'm looking forward to that day. It'll be magnificent. The names of the stars say more than the pictures. It really starts to make more sense. So just to recap, I don't think I had discussed this in the last two videos, but it's very important. Most of the names that we have that have been passed down to us today came from the Arabian pre-Islamic Arabs. And the pre-Islamic Arabs, if you follow them back, were from the line of Shem. They came through Ishmael, which was one of Abraham's children. And the line of Shem was one of the sons of the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem was the Semites. Out of them came all the Semitic tribes, which were the Jews, the Islamic tribes, and some other Arabian tribes that you still find in Arabia and the Middle East today. And so those tribes, if you follow back and you learn about them, were considered by the ancient world to be the followers of God. The Shem was the firstborn of Noah, and he tended to be the one that kind of carried the torch in the family for the worship of God. The sons of Cain tended to be the ones that were in rebellion against God. And then the sons of Japheth were the Gentiles, basically. They tended to become the European nations. So when you recognize that these names were preserved not by Christians, not by Jews, not even by Islamists, they had nothing to do with any religion other than what they were given through the stars. Anyway, let's dive into this now. So the names of these stars in Capricorn are, remember we just got off of the constellation, the last one that we looked at. Let me go back here. The last one we looked at was Sagittarius. Remember, so it was kind of wrapping up as the book of Revelation does. It gives us one picture of something and then it'll revisit the same situation from a different angle. So the story was kind of wrapped up, and now we're looking at this story from a different angle with Capricornus. We're looking at it from the side of people who are not just in heaven looking down, but who are on earth waiting for this hope to come to us. So in the head of the Capricorn are these stars. Now, if you study the Bible in Leviticus, there are multiple offerings that were a part of the system that God set up with the sanctuary. There were sin offerings, there were peace offerings, there were wave offerings, and always, 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 when it was talking about a sin offering, so an offering made to atone for sin, it would always be either a sheep or a kid goat, a little young billy goat. And and so what's interesting is that the name of one of these stars in the head, Al-Giedi, means a young billy goat, and in that culture people would have associated that with a sin offering in some way or another, because the next star in that head of the goat is the little goat that is to be slaughtered. I find that very interesting. And then one of the other stars is the slaughterer. And then, of all weird things, in the tail of the fish, even though that was a slaughtering, in the tail of the fish, and remember, this is not Jewish, this is not anything. It says it's the bearer of good news. And for those of you that are familiar with the word gospel, that word means the good news. So you have a killing of a goat, and it ends up in the tail that this is good news. Very strange. So the other thing that people would equate in the ancient world, if you've seen, there's a really cool series called Planet Earth that shows in Africa how this drought-ridden plain will fill with water, and all of a sudden all life is drawn to that location. Well, in the desert areas of the Middle East, this is likely what would happen too, when the rains would fall and then they would suddenly have flash floods or rivers start to flow. the fish would swim upstream and it would look like this. And so when they thought of fish, it was really equated in multiple ways with this life that would happen, that all the animals were drawn to, all the plants would start to bloom from. And so it goes from death, a symbol of death and sacrifice, to a symbol of new life, which is very interesting. And then one of the deacons that's above it, if you remember above that in the stars, is this Delphinius, which is a dolphin. And I thought, what a cool way to think of the new life in Christ in a way that I'd never thought of it before, as the joy of leaping up like a dolphin out of the ocean. And if you've been around dolphins at all, you know how happy and fun they are. And to think of the Christian life in this way was just a breath of fresh air for me. As not a plague, not a burden, not a trial, not a persecution, but joy in this new life that has been granted to us from the sacrifice of Christ. So, moving on from there, let's dive into the symbol or the constellation of Aquarius. So you can see it also is along the ecliptic, and it's this man pouring water, and the water is going into the mouth of this fish called Fomalhaut. And Fomalhaut, that star, is one of the most bright stars in the sky at night. So, in the stars of the name Aquarius, the water bearer, he's pouring things out, and the name of one of the stars, Saeed al-Malik, is the luck of the king. The luck of the king, or the good. I would say that luck is equated with good news, or something good, something lucky. So the good news of the king, or the gospel, is being poured out of this water jar after the sacrifice of Christ. And so in this symbol, it sort of shows how the gospel is flowing out from that to the world. This happiness that the joy that these dolphins are experiencing is flowing out to other fish that are drinking it up. And then the next star is the luckiest of the lucky. And when these stars are starting to come out toward the rainy season, when the spring is starting and all the new plants are starting to grow new leaves. And in the ancient world, the Egyptian, Persian, and Arab world, they thought of this time of year as the lucky time because things were starting to happen. And really in an agrarian society where everything depended on that rain, they really thought of this time of year as the foundation of their society. So it was a really happy time. Everything was that they needed to survive was being poured out by those rains. And so Siyat, one of the stars in this, is a wish. And then in answer to that wish, there's this another star called the outpouring of the water. And then down here at the bottom is the one that's just drinking it in, swallowing it up, Al-Bali, the swallower. And this fish is called the Pisces astrinus, which means the southern fish. It's below the equator, or the ecliptic, excuse me, so it's in the southern hemisphere of the sky. And then the Fomalhaut, as I mentioned before, is the mouth of the fish, that drinking mouth. And so I think of this, after Jesus died, as the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, because that was promised. And certainly when you think of it from a little group, a very small little group of 12 apostles, which came out of a very small little group of 12 patriarchs, we now have this gospel going not just to the Jews, but to the whole world. And we'll explore that a little bit further in our next constellations after these deacons. So this deacon of Pegasus in the Aquarius sign is one of my favorite in the whole sky. Not because I think that horses are beautiful and winged horses are beautiful, but because of the nature of the message that's in these stars. So the word Pegasus itself, this winged horse, Pega in the ancient language means the chief or the king. And Sus means he's swiftly coming or returning. And then again, some of the bigger stars in this says Markab, the returning, Shiat, the going away and coming back, the going and returning. Sa'id al-Matar, the lucky star of the rain. So again, that rain is coming and the Holy Spirit is being poured out. Sa'id al-Bari, the lucky star of the splendid one. And Sa'id al-Humam, the lucky star of the high-minded or the man of high spirit. So in the way that, you know, when you understand the story of how Jesus came, he died, he gave the promise of the Holy Spirit, and he left. And he said when he left, I am coming back. This really, I mean, the story is just flowing as chronologically as it was given. So it's really cool. And then another deacon in the same constellation is Cygnus the Swan. You can see it here. The name of the biggest star is the Lord or Judge to come. And then another star is Azel, the one who goes and returns. So again, he's saying, I'm going away, but I'm coming back. Something has to happen while I'm gone, but I'm coming back. Fafaj means the glorious shining forth. Sadir is who returns as in a circle, and this is, you're going to see this repeated in some of the other constellations. He goes away, he makes a circle, he comes back. Adij means flying swiftly. Aridid is he shall come down, and Afarasis is the riders. And when you think of a swan, I was looking at pictures of swans, and they do have riders on their back. And the Bible talks about how when Christ returns, he's going to bring us up with him, so that where we are, we can be with him. And here's this swan carrying her little babies on her back, not just in behind her, but with her. I thought that was pretty cool. All right. The next one is Pisces. So here's the two fish. And Pisces is incredible in that if you read about this in the ancient lore, it's one of the most ancient, it's in the most ancient texts of all in the zodiac, and it's always two fish, and these two fish are portrayed as female. And you'll remember, if you've studied the book of Revelation or anything, that a woman generally, whether she's a good or bad woman, represents the people of God. If she's a good woman, she's a pure virgin. If she's the bad church, she's generally portrayed as a harlot or somebody that cheats on her husband. But these fish are good fish. And one of them in the ancient stories is portrayed as the initiator, and the other as that person's progeny or their descendants. So the way that it's been interpreted in the Gospel and the Stars, which makes some sense to me, is that the Jewish people under Abraham, where God said to them, I'm going to bless you and I'm going to make you a blessing. If you leave your country and you follow me, out of you will flow a nation whose number can't be counted. They're like the stars. And so when you think of fish, this is kind of the idea that we're getting, is it's not just one or two fish, it's multitudes of fish. So in the Syriac, the word for Pisces is nuno, and it means the fish lengthened out, which in the interpreter's mind was not just a long fish, a long skinny fish, but representing that there would be posterity for generations upon generations and multitudes of people coming out of this fish. And then the pouring point, or the progeny, an alferg, from the old fish, that's this top fish, the progeny from the old fish, and then the progeny of the latter time, which was this fish. So it's talking about the fish before Christ came, and then the fish after he came. that are all here today. Then Alrisha is this little point where their band meets. So that's another important point. From the earliest times, these fish were depicted with a band on them, like a ribbon or a cord that's tying them together, so they're bonded together. And Alrisha, that word, came from the Babylonian risku, which I can't tell you whether or not that means a risk, but the Arabic said that meant the rope, the band, the bridle, or the cord. And then Al-Uqda, which is right around this area also, meant the knot, or somehow these fish are tied together. They're united together. And then Al-Samaka, which is another, it's right here by the mouth of this southernish fish. That means the upheld. So by this rope that ties them together, they're being upheld. And I want you to keep that in mind as we go forward, because we're going to be referring back to these little fish when we talk about the constellations that are around them. All right, so when we're talking about the church and the former and latter churches, in the early rains of the Holy Spirit and the latter rains that would be poured out, of course, there's persecution in the church. And so the next, let me show you in the stars here. So here we have the Pisces, and then right above them, right here, is Andromeda, which is one of their deacons. So let's go back to Andromeda. So Andromeda is the chained woman. She's chained to a rock here. And if you've seen the Clash of the Titans, it kind of tells the story that was from ancient Greece. But she's chained and she's stretched out according to the names of the stars that are with her. And Adhil, one of the stars, means the afflicted. Merak is the weak. Mizar is the bound. And then she has somebody coming to save her. Incidentally, all the pictures I could find that were kind of from the ancient world or earlier renditions of this story, she's always depicted naked and totally vulnerable, just chained up. And there's this sea monster that's coming to eat her. And she can't get away. She can't run away. So Al-Mosala, one of the stars in her areas here, means that she is delivered from the grave. It's also interpreted as Sheol, Hades, and Hell, delivered from hell. And then Misam al-Thuraya means the assembled or the abundance. So after she's delivered, she's assembled in a good way to something that's good. And again, this predicts the unfortunate persecution of the church.
This part of the constellation is called the Bound and Chained, also known as the Bound and Chained Bride. And the picture in the heavens is a woman who is bound. She is chained. She is waiting for her deliverer. And it looks like there is no one there to help. It looks like she is set in space and there is no one anywhere around her to be able to help, except there is one that is destined to help her. And it is the bound and chained bride, and this is the picture that we see in the book of Thessalonians. Remember, it is Paul who said, "It is a righteous act with God to repay tribulation to those who are now tribulating you." Those believers were undergoing a great deal of persecution. Being chained to the world, they were being hurt by the world, tortured by the world, and Paul says it's a righteous act. God will repay tribulation to those who are now tribulating you. You take heart, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. And he says, and you who are now being tribulated will rest when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who know not God. The word rest in the Greek is the word anison. Yes, anison, which means fast pain relief. And the picture in the heavens is literally this bound and chained woman who is waiting for her deliverer. And the word anison in Greek literature is pictured as a woman who is bound and chained, who is being stretched out, who is being tortured, who is right at the point where there is no hope. She is blackening out right when it looks like it's all the darkest, the very darkest hour in which there is no hope. The stage has been set, because the greatest deliverance is about to happen.
And we're going to look at the sea monster. He's another constellation that we'll be looking at in the next series, or in the next set. But before we do, we have to look at another deacon. This deacon is Cepheus. So let's look at him up here. He's right here. And so, and here's the sea monster that's kind of after her, and she's here. Let's go back. So Cepheus means, his name means the branch or the king. And you'll recall from the Virgo constellation that we talked about in the last video that Virgo was bearing a branch, which was a symbol of the seed that would grow into the Messiah that she would bear. So this is him in his finalized state as king on his throne. And again, this star on his shoulder is Al-Diramin. It means coming quickly, just like the swan, as in a circle. Right here in his belly, Al-Furq means the Redeemer. And by the way, in the ancient world, the belly area was the area that was the seat of emotion in their mind. So in his fondest emotions, he thinks of himself as our Redeemer. And then Regulus, I don't have a picture of where that is in this, it means treading underfoot. Al-Rai, that's in his knee, means the one who bruises or breaks. It also means the shepherd and the vociferator. I had to look that up because that's not a word I use every day. So to one group, to the group that likely responds to him, he's a shepherd, but to the other group, he's the vociferator. And to vociferate means to shout, complain, argue loudly or vehemently. And so, you know, the Bible talks about when he comes back for us, he descends with a loud voice, with a shout. And I thought that was very interesting. And then, interestingly enough, you'll remember from the last video, we talked about Draco being the center at the pole star, the dragon. But then he, since the time of the cross, since the time of the beginning of the planet, that pole star has shifted as the center of what the stars all revolve around. And lo and behold, it is now right under his foot, under this king's foot. So it went from the dragon to the symbol of the victorious coming Christ, which I find fabulous and very interesting. And what's interesting too is that this king he's a redeemer. He didn't take the throne like the Scorpio. He waited until the characters were revealed in that judgment we talked about in Libra, so that his crown is given to him. He is worthy of it, rather than he just took it by force. All right, now we're going to move next to the next constellation, or the final one, and its deacons in this series. And this one is Aries the Lamb. And again, there's nothing in our, there was no Jewish roots here. There was no Christian roots. Nobody was trying to force this. It was just there in the pre-Islamic Arab world. And I find that very interesting. So up in the head, you'll see these stars. Al-Hamal is the name of Aries, and it meant the sheep, the lamb, or the ram. And it also meant the gentle and the merciful. So it's, in many ways, it's talking about innocence. And then this innocence is about to suffer. So Mesartim, that's one of the names right here, means the bound, the minister or the servant. Al-Sharatan, that's this one right here, means the bruised. El-Nath, that's here right in his forehead, means the wounded. And El-Natik right above that means the slain or the killed. So this really is the emblem of suffering by a victim that was innocent and didn't deserve to be killed for any sin. Now above his head are 3 stars that make a triangle. They call those Ras al Thalitha. And that the name of those stars together means the exalted, the chief, the uplifted head. You'll remember Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men to me. So very interesting. Next, his deacons, the Aries deacons, we have the sea monster. So you remember the Pisces and their bands here. Interestingly enough, their knot is in Cetus, in this sea monster that's pulling them in the opposite direction, and they are swimming away from it. So here's Cetus, his head is over here, Pisces is over here as a V, and here's his head, Cetus's head, and Cetus's tail. So he's swimming one way, and they are swimming away from him. Now, if you watch the Clash of the Titans, this is the same monster that's going after Andromeda that we just looked at, the girl that's in chains that he's coming to eat. And he's in that movie, he's called the Kraken. In ancient Greek stories, he's also called the Typhon, which in their words is the father of all monsters. And in light of the great controversy and the war in heaven where Satan was cast out from heaven to earth, there's a similar story behind this monster that there was a person who was cast from Olympus, which is heaven, and he was thrown to earth, and from the underworld he creates this monster to destroy, to go back and try to destroy the people that kicked him out of heaven. And what's interesting is in the Chinese astrology, which is quite a bit different, they look at this area under this Cetus whale monster, and they call that the cesspit. So it's the underworld, it's the place where he's coming from, but it's disgusting and horrible. And then Minkar is his nostril, and the word in his nostril is bound, or he's bound or chained. He's a bound or chained enemy. Mira in the middle, where his heart is, so again this is another symbol of Satan, is the rebel, the one that's in rebellion. Difta, one of the other stars in this constellation, means he's overthrown or thrust down. And Kal Af Jadma is the cut short hand. So he's trying to do something, but his attempt is cut off. It's cut short. So very interesting. Now, there's one thing I want you to note as well. So he is pulling on these fish, likely in a persecutive way. He's coming after Andromeda to destroy her. And I want you to notice, it's not in all depictions, but it's in the old ones. It's not in the new ones, unfortunately, in Stellarium. But the foot of the lamb is stretched over these bands as if to say, I'll let you go so far, but no further. That ultimately, over all of our challenges and over all of our pain, the lamb is in charge. And he is only allowing what he will allow, just like he did with Job. All right, next is Perseus. So again, if you've seen the Clash of the Titans, this relates back to Andromeda. And she's tied up there with the sea monster coming to get her. And he is the hero, another symbol of Christ, that goes and he has to do a bunch of stuff behind the scenes, but finally he comes when he's ready, and just in the nick of time, when she needs him very much the most. And he comes in on his flying horse, that's the Pegasus we looked at earlier, And he has the head of Medusa, which is the only way that he can kill this dragon, is by turning that head toward it and turning it into stone. This is not really how it died. Anyway, let's look at the meanings in this constellation here. So the name Perseus in the ancient language means the breaker, or the one who breaks the bonds. So remember, she's chained up, and then he comes and he breaks her bonds. And then Murphak, which is really nice, it's here in his heart, chest area. It means the one who assists, or the one that you can lean on. And you can see she's leaning on him here. And then Al-Ghanib is the one who carries away. That's another one. So he's carrying her, he rescues her, and he's carrying her away from danger. Now, he's also, that's him, but he's carrying this ugly head of the snake woman, Medusa, that killed everybody else in their attempt to kill her. They all died, but he's the only one that was able to get rid of her. And her name, Medusa, means the trodden underfoot. And then one of the stars in her is Rosh Satan, Rosh Satan. It means the head of the enemy. Al-Ona means the subdued or the weakened. Al-Ghul means the evil spirit. And then Al-Ghul, which is her eye, is the coming and going. So it came, it did its thing, and now it's done. And it also means the rolled head. So Satan had his chance. He tried to win, and he is done. And the coming and the going one that comes back again comes back and rescues us from that.
This is the sign in the heavens, in the Hebrew, called the breaker. Now, the breaker has in his hand, above his head, a sword in his hand. And then in the other hand, he has what is called in the Greek astrological charts as kaput Medusa, or the head of Medusa. But in the Hebrew, it is not kaput Medusa, it is Rosh Satan. It is the head of Satan. And right between the eyes of Satan's head, right between his eyes and his forehead, is a star called Al-Ghul. Al-Ghul right in the forehead of Rosh Satan. And it was in 1996 that a comet came through. The comet Hyakutake, in the month of April, came through, and it went right straight through the forehead of Rosh Satan, right in conjunction with that star, Al-Ghul. Now, Hyakutake was on a 20,000-year plus circuit. What that means is that it's one of the most brilliant comets during our entire lifetime, that came through, and it only comes through once in the history of planet Earth. On a 20,000-year circuit, it hasn't been here before. It won't be here again, and this is God's sign in the heavens, and that is an explanation in showing what is about to come to pass. Because that comet went right straight through the forehead of Rosh Satan. Exactly 1 solar year later, to the very night, another comet came through, and this was on a 4,500-year circuit. This was named Hale-Bopp, after those who had discovered it. But this comet came through, and at the very night, 1 solar year later, was in conjunction, and it went right straight through the forehead of Rosh Satan, just like the crosshairs. Now, this sign in the heavens was also something that was seen in its intermediate fulfillment at the time of David. Remember, it was David who was anointed as the king, but was not yet the king of Israel. He was anointed as the king, and he went out to face Goliath. David took a stone in a sling, and he put it right dead center in the forehead of Goliath, right in Al-Ghul, right in the forehead of Goliath, and it knocked him out. Then David went over and drew out Goliath's sword, lopped Goliath's head off, and then paraded around with Goliath's sword above his head, with Goliath's head in his hands. He had taken out Goliath, and it was a victory dance. That is just a shadow picture of who this really is, because this is the Messiah. He it is who is going to knock Satan out. He's going to chop his head off, and he is going to be the victor, parading around with the head of Satan in his hands. The King of Kings, the breaker, is going to come and free his bound and chained bride. He is going to take her to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And it is there that we see that this last Shavuot, on the final day of Shavuot, that is the day that another comet came through in the same constellation. It came in and went out on Shavuot, which is the last of the spring feast. This, I believe, is the final sign that we are going to get now in the heavens before the fall feasts begin their fulfillment. And is letting us know that our Redeemer, our King, is going to come back someday. It's going to be soon. When it looks like there is no hope, that is when he is the one that is going to take vengeance on them who know not God and who keep not his commandments. Those who have been troubling and causing his beloved the pain and affliction. Fast pain relief is on the way. The Messiah will be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels.
All right. Then there's one last slide here and one last deacon. You've probably seen this W in the sky. It's one of the most prominent things I ever see with the naked eye in the sky. It's up toward the Big Dipper, and very obvious. And so this is Cassiopeia, and it's a woman on a throne. So after Andromeda is saved, she becomes the enthroned woman. She's been saved. Her name, Cassiopeia, means enthroned, the enthroned and the beautiful. In her hand, at Kaf, right here, is the branch. And you'll recall, if you remember the story of Jesus coming in on the donkey, people were waving branches because that meant victory, a symbol of triumph, and it also meant that you're the king. So she's got her royal branch. And remember, the king, Cepheus, we looked at earlier, his name means the branch, the king. Then Shadar, at her heart, which is right here, it means the freed or the delivered, the one that's been saved from the evil in the world. Rukba, here, where her bottom would sit, likely, means the seated or the enthroned. And then Sigen, this is so cool, at her feet. Seg means victory, and Win, the bottom of Sigen, means friend. So remember, Cepheus, I'm going to go right back to him, his foot, and she's right here. So they're side by side. His foot is on the pole star. He's now the ruler of the world, of the universe. His foot is on the star that means the turning point. And her foot, because he rescued her, is on it means the victory that was won by my friend. Now, very romantically, both of these constellations side by side, because they're right next to the pole star, they never set in the sky, which I think is really cool because it's kind of indicative of the fact that they have a happily ever after that will never end. They have, because the whole sin issue and Satan issue has been resolved, now they will live and reign forever and ever and ever and happily ever after.
Now, most people don't realize that by the way, the 12 signs of the zodiac are linked to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm going to leave that out for this discussion because we can't possibly even get into all of this, but something you do need to know, We're going to start with Virgo. It starts with Virgo, ends up with Leo. That's the cycle. So how do you know where to start? Because of the Sphinx in Egypt, the head of the woman and the body of the lion. And the word Sphinx means the binding together. But let's get on with this. Virgo the Virgin, we've all heard about that. What you may not realize, for each of the 12 constellations, there are 3 closely associated with it. They're not in the ecliptic, but they're nearby. They're called decans. Now, the decans for the Virgin are Coma the infant. Now, that's weird. Why would a virgin have an infant? Think about it. It means the desired one, incidentally. Centaurus is a dart piercing a victim. Booty is the great shepherd and harvester. The next major constellation is Libra, which means the scales. And the three decans for it are the cross, the victim, and the crown. That's kind of interesting. Then you have Scorpio, as we often hear taught, which is serpent's the serpent, no surprise. Orpheus, which wrestles with the serpent. And when he wrestles with the serpent's biting him on one heel, but he's got his foot on its head. Does that ring familiar to you? It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Hercules, the mighty man. Sagittarius has Lyra the eagle holding a lyre, an altar, Draco the dragon, the old serpent. Capricornus has an arrow, an eagle, and a dolphin, and Aquarius has a southern fish, a winged horse, and a swan. Pisces has the band, Andromeda is the woman in chains, and Cephas the crowned king. Aries has Cassiopeia. These are all the decans. The woman enthroned, we all know that's that bent W that's near the pole star. The sea monster who was bound by a lamb, and Perseus, an armed-minded man. And then Taurus has Orion, the glorious prince, Orion's river, and a shepherd. Gemini has the hare, and 2 dogs. The major dog, Sirius, the great dog, and Procyon, the minor one. And Cancer has Ursa Minor, Ursa Major, the lesser and greater sheepfold, and Argo, the ship. And then the last one is Leo, who has the fleeing serpent, the cup of wrath, and the bird of doom. Now, these are all embellished with colorful stories that are very similar in most cultures throughout thousands of years, slightly different here and there. But let me tell you what everybody gets told that's not true. Everybody says, well, these are pictures, and they've built stories around the pictures because that's the way they look to them up there. Well, that's ridiculous. Go out at night sky and look at Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia looks like a W. It's just opposite the pole star. And there's no way, it's a W. There's no way it looks like a woman chained to a chair holding an ear of corn. I mean, come on. But it's consistent. The story's consistent. The cluster of the stars has nothing to do with the pictures that are associated with them. That's something obvious just by looking at the pictures. What most people don't know, including most astronomers, is where you get the story is by knowing the names of the stars in the order of their brightness. When you know the names of the stars in the order of their brightness, you can put together the story that originally was told about it and the pictures to remind you of the story, not the stars. You with me? It's a mnemonic that you teach kids with. You know, if you're teaching the piano, the spaces are F-A-C-E, right? No, there's no face there, but you use that as a way, you know, F-A-C, whatever. It's a mnemonic, right? We all use mnemonics, right? There are many scholars that believe they were the mnemonics that Adam and Enoch taught their kids, God's plan of redemption. Now, what we call the zodiac, that's from the Greek zodiakos, which comes from a Hebrew root, which comes from Sanskrit, but means sodi. It means the way. Now, most astronomy books assume that it's called the way because that's the way of the sun. It's the path of the sun. Having studied this at some length, I'm thoroughly convinced that this term is being used exactly the same way as it is in the book of Acts. It's an allusion to God's plan of redemption. We have Virgo the Virgin, which represents the seed of the woman. This is the constellation of the 3 deacons. Seed of the woman, Coma is the desire of nations, the man of double nature and humiliation, and the exalted shepherd and harvester. All are carried by the constellation of Virgo and the 3 deacons that are associated with it. Libra is the price to be paid and the cross to be endured, the victim that was slain, and the crown that is purchased. And this gets kind of interesting. Scorpio speaks of the conflict, the serpent's coils, the struggle with the enemy, and the toiling of the vanquisher of evil. Sagittarius speaks of the double-natured one triumphing. He gladdens the heavens, he builds fires of punishment, he casts down the dragon. Capricornus, life out of death, the arrow of God, pierced and failing, springing up again in abundant life. Aquarius, the life waters from on high, drinking in the heavenly food, carrying the good news, bearing aloft the cross over all the earth. You got the Southern Cross in here too. I won't get into that here. Pisces has the multiplication of the Redeemer's people, upheld and governed by the Lamb, intended bride bound and exposed, the bridegroom exalted. Aries has the Lamb found worthy, the bride released and be making ready, Satan bound, and the breaker triumphing. Taurus, the invincible rulers come, the sublime vanquisher, the river of judgment, the all-ruling shepherd. Gemini has the marriage of the Lamb, the enemy trodden down, the prince coming in glory, and his princely following. You get to what we call Cancer, the possession secured. It speaks of two folds, the lesser fold, the church of the firstborn, and the greater fold, Israel, sevenfolding into an everlasting kingdom. And the final one, of course, is Leo the lion, the king rending, the serpent fleeing, the bowl of wrath upon him, his carcass devoured. On the one hand, this is quite conjectural and very controversial. There are many Bible teachers think that this is way out in left field. And on the other hand, it's my view that there is enough here that seems for real to respect it. There are many things in here that are still, we're filling in blanks that we don't really have enough of the names of some of the stars to justify some of the things it said. But I want to show it to you because of because of this whole business, that the stars were put there for signs. And God's greatest achievement is not the creation. The creation is emphasized in Genesis and in Romans 1 and in Job 38 and so forth, and Isaiah 44 and 45, etc. But you can take a half a dozen passages and that's it. God's greatest achievement, his greatest glory, is not the creation, it's the redemption. See, how do you say that, Chuck? You measure it by two things. First of all, how much space in the Bible is devoted to the subject? Well, the creation has a chapter or two in Genesis, a chapter and two in Job, and a chapter or two in Isaiah, and that's largely it. The redemption, whole book of Genesis, certainly the book of Exodus, where they're redeemed out of Egypt, certainly Leviticus, the Torah is all about it. And you go through the historical books, is the whole idea of Israel's ultimate redemption. Certainly the prophets, certainly the Gospels, certainly the epistles. Revelation is what's the revelation all about? The climax of God's plan of redemption. There's another way you can measure how important it is. And that is, what did it cost God? What did it cost God to create the universe? 6 days. Breathed out of his nostrils, as the scripture would put it. What did his redemption cost him? It cost him his son. And there are aspects of that that are permanent forever.